Welcome, friends. This is my privilege to introduce Professor Subimal Ghosh for today's Sustainable Seminar Series talk, which is a flagship of Kiran C. Patel Center. Um, this Center for KPCSD, Kiran C. Patel Center for Sustainable Development, undertakes cutting-edge research on sustainability and related topics, challenges of contemporary meaning. And it is promoting very high societal, cost-effective, sustainable solutions through a strong outreach and technology transfer program. And I think the Sustainable Seminar Series is one of the part of outreach, and where we really invite those colleagues who have achieved and who have the plenty of experience. And what could be the better person from Professor Subimal Ghosh, who is currently serving as a professor in Department of Civil Engineering, Center for Urban. He has joint affiliation with the Center for Urban Science and Engineering and Interdisciplinary Program in Climate Change at IIT Bombay. He is the alumni of IIC, and he has been awarded India's largest research award, Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, last year, 2019, for the recognition of his work, his significant contribution to our understanding of how land surface processes influences the Indian monsoon, as well as improving regional monsoon simulations and prediction, which is very critical. Apart from that, you will see that how this, the man has gone step by step, brick to brick, and on several other ecologists which might have met in the journey. And he owns the Swarnajayanti Fellowship, Indian National Science Academy Young Scientist Award, Indian National Academy of Engineers Young Engineer Award, National Academy of Science India Young Scientist Award, and Indian Science Congress Association Young Scientist Award. And he is the lead author of IPCC Assessment Report 6. It's a long list. What I can say is that he has been influencing us from his work, inspiring us. And so today we would be hosting him, and he will take 45 to 50 minutes. And so that the later part, we want to have you ask as much as we can interact. And Falguni will be your moderator and host. We will be opening if you wish to talk or interact, just raise your hand and we will be doing the needful. So Professor Ghosh, now it's yours.
Thank you, Professor Manish Kumar, for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I'm honored and humbled. It's always a pleasure to present my work in one of the premier institute like Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar, not only for making huge research contributions, specifically in the area of earth and environmental sciences, and at the same time where a lot of my friends are here, like Udit, one of my close collaborator and friend, Vimal is there, Manish, you are there, so it's Professor Rishi is there, so it's always a pleasure to present our work in an institute like IIT Gandhinagar. So I'll start sharing my slides. Today I'll be talking about feedback from land processes to Indian monsoon, and this is the work which was done by quite a number of students. And today I'll be showing specifically the work done by Amay Pathak. Amay was my student, who is now an assistant professor at IIT Kharagpur. My other student, Dr. Anjana Devanand, who is now in Australia for his postdoctoral fellowship. My students Sachin Budakati and Tejasvi Chauhan, they are my present doctoral student. And this is the work which has been done with the students from civil engineering as well as from interdisciplinary program in climate studies. So when we are talking about feedback from land processes to Indian monsoon, this is something slightly different what we think about monsoon water cycle conventionally. When we talk about monsoon, we always think about the large scale processes. we always think about large scale processes. We always think monsoon is a part of atmospheric process, or it's a coupled atmosphere ocean processes. And land is something which has been neglected for quite some time. Here what we are trying to understand is that we all know that monsoon will have impact on land, but what we are trying to say is that land also has some feedback to monsoon or any kind of atmospheric processes, and we are trying to quantify what are the feedback from land to monsoon, in what way we can prove that, in what way we can quantify that. So that is the purpose of today's talk. So when I'll start the talk, I'll start with one of the very famous paper by Stephen et al. In PNAS, where we all know that Earth has been going from different ages, starting from glacier ages and so on, and now we are in Anthropocene. Anthropocene means where anthropogenic activities are maximum. The Earth system is driven by anthropogenic activities, which is one of the highest anthropogenic activities greenhouse gas emissions. So we are somewhere here where we are in Anthropocene, and these are our possible trajectories. So it has been mentioned that if you are crossing certain threshold, then you will be reaching certain tipping point, and after that you cannot really come back to its original condition. So you lose your sort of resilience. And so if you cross the planetary threshold, which is given here, then you will be entering into the condition which is known as hothouse Earth. So one of the science question that has been raised by Stephen et al. In their PNAS paper is that when we'll be crossing the planetary threshold, probably feedbacks will become very, very important in that part of scenarios, because sometimes these feedbacks actually help us to come back to our original condition. But when we cross the thresholds, then what will be the changes in feedbacks? That would be a very interesting question, and we are actually clueless about it. So this is one of the things which has been mentioned in Stephen et al. Now, at the same time, if you see, the other recent paper, so there was another paper by Bonan and Donep in 2018 in the Science magazine, where they have mentioned that one of the major challenge of Earth system science is to predict the life in Earth system models, because understanding the biosphere is extremely difficult. What will be the trajectory of the biosphere is extremely difficult, and that is one of the most challenging tasks for Earth system science. We all know that because of global change, there will be stress. And of course, there are impact models that can tell us about impacts on biosphere, but there is a huge uncertainty. And it's very difficult to understand what will be the trajectory of the biosphere. And once we have some understanding about the trajectory of the biosphere, then only we'll be able to understand what will be its feedback to the atmospheric processes. So considering that, because we have been, the different recent literatures have started mentioning that, the biosphere or the ecosystem is becoming very, very important in terms of sending feedback to the atmospheric processes or controlling the Earth system processes. The future direction is that, in what way we can actually simulate Earth system model where your biosphere is continuously changing, or where your biosphere is dynamic. There are certain studies which have been performed at local scale, and one of the kind of a debatable study which was performed in in Australia, for arid Australia, which came in Nature Climate Change around 2015, where it was mentioned that when there is a increased CO2. So this is again a very controversial topic, in what way vegetation reacts to increased carbon dioxide. So there is one group of researchers who have thought that, okay, with increased CO2, the limiting precipitation threshold for vegetation, the precipitation threshold for vegetation will be reduced, and because of which there will be a lot of greening. And because of the greening, again, there will be a lot of moisture demand by the vegetation, and because of which there will be a decreased runoff. But again, after that, there are a lot of debate, and people have started mentioning, okay, we already have huge carbon dioxide. So after that, again, if you add some more carbon dioxide, there will be hardly any impacts on the vegetation, where the other group of thoughts, they mention that, well, increased carbon dioxide still have impacts on vegetation. We don't know what exactly will happen, but it's definitely a major area of potential research. And here the data which was used by these people were from Australia, the arid Australia region. Now, why feedback is important? So I'll again go back to one of the paper by Schaefer and Carpenter 2003. It came in Trends in Ecology and Evolution, and this was a very nice representation of resilience, tipping point, and role of vegetation or role of feedback. So what was mentioned very nicely was something like this. I'll try to explain a little bit this figure, because this figure is very interesting. This figure is a very interesting figure, though this is not really any simulation, but this was some kind of a hypothetical scenario what was generated by Schaefer and Carpenter. Let us try to understand what does it say. So this is what is the global climatic factors, which is controlling the global precipitation and so on. And this is the region or actual precipitation that is actually happening. Now, what is being mentioned is something like this. With vegetation, it follows certain lines. Like if there is certain change in global climatic parameters, the precipitation is actually changing, and this is with vegetation. Now, what is being mentioned is that when the precipitation starts dropping, your vegetation growth also reduces, and there will be a critical precipitation value for vegetation below which the vegetation will not be able to make any impacts on the atmosphere, or vegetation will not really make a significant impact or feedback to the atmosphere. And when we cross this threshold, then suddenly we'll fall in this line where the earth system will be considered as if it is without vegetation, and this again follows this line, and it will follow this. So essentially there will be a significant drop if we consider with vegetation and without vegetation. And this drop was mentioned because it was mentioned when vegetation cannot really send a feedback. That means the moisture that is being generated from the vegetation to the atmosphere, which is essentially the recycled component or recycled precipitation, that will be dropped, and because of which there will be a sudden drop, or it is sort of a tipping point, which was mentioned by Schaefer and Carpenter. Now, if you remember in the previous slide, I have mentioned about Stephen et al., where it was mentioned that the feedback will become very, very important in terms of defining the tipping point. And this is what again being mentioned by Schaefer and Carpenter in their Trends in Ecology and Evolution paper. And what was mentioned is that, let's say if you have some sort of stability like this, and when there is a perturbation that generates into multiple stable points, and finally there will be a change in the tipping point. And this is what is kind of a major challenge, and we are actually clueless about what will be our tipping point and what will be in what way in future the after crossing the threshold the earth will behave. Now the other important thing which is becoming very interesting, and which is becoming very important, is that we have now started looking into the system as a network. And I know Professor Udit Bhatia has been working significantly on this network analysis, which is very nice, because this is something what is required in earth system science. uh, so one of the thing what's mentioned is that normally till now what we are considering each and every system or each and every sphere of earth system as individuals. And when there is stress, because of the stress there will be some degradation. Now what is happening is that the degradation is something like this, because each and every component is getting degraded one by one, and so you'll find the degradation state will be like this. But essentially what Schaefer et al. In their science paper has mentioned that all these components are connected to each other through a network. And as there is a connection through network, what is happening when there is a stress on any of this component, there is a resistance to change, and there are local repairs that is taking place. These are kind of a theoretical knowledge, so without much of numerical experiments and so on. But this was more like a theoretical knowledge, where it was mentioned that okay, so when there is a well, so sorry about the disconnection and internet problem. So we are somewhere here where we are trying to understand that earth system processes are essentially a kind of a network process. And because of the resistance to change and local repairs, what is happening, it will try to maintain or try to kind of absorb the stress, but after a certain point it cannot, so entire system drops, and it is sort of the crossing the tipping point. So essentially, if you look into the water cycle, of course, when you're talking about monsoon, we are more interested in this part. What is the moisture that is coming ocean and joins the atmosphere? Because large scale processes are of major interest for monsoon. but from the land also you can see these evapotranspirations, and we are not very sure what are the roles they are playing in terms of Indian monsoon. As the arrow sizes are really small, they also get kind of a low attention. They don't really get enough attention, but they play a major role in terms of not only the moisture balance or water cycle, but in terms of also modifying the energy cycle. So we'll try to understand in what way they make um, impacts, significant impacts. So before going to that, I'll just highlight one of our paper which came in Nature Climate Change in 2012, where we have mentioned that the spatial variability of extreme rainfall has been increasing. And this is very interesting because if you consider from 1950 onwards, there has been a significant increase in the spatial variations of Indian monsoon rainfall extremes. And when you're talking about mentioning the variation, increase in the spatial variation, that means the regionally the rainfall pattern of one region is becoming different from its neighboring region, and that tells us probably the local processes are playing a major role behind this. Otherwise we should have seen kind of a similar kind of a spatial variation. So spatial variations is increasing at a very high rate probably means that probably regional processes are important, and that probably makes us to think a little bit about how to really understand these regional processes, or how to really quantify the feedback from the regional processes. Now to understand the feedback from regional processes, what we started doing is that we tried to understand the recycled precipitation. This work was done by Professor Amay Pathak, who was my PhD student and is now in IIT Kharagpur as an assistant professor, in collaboration with Professor Praveen Kumar of University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So what we tried to do here is that, let's say if you're considering a region, and if you're considering the atmospheric moisture budget, there are two sources of moisture. One is coming from outside, which are known as advective moisture. The other moisture is being generated from the evapotranspiration of this region only. Now, when precipitation occurs, it's essentially, it has both the components. It has the advective components as well as it has the component that is being generated from the evapotranspiration of that region. Now, if you consider the precipitation from the local evapotranspiration divided by the total precipitation, this is known as recycling ratio. And the precipitation that is being generated from the evapotranspiration of this local region is known as recycled precipitation. So the idea here was to quantify the recycled precipitation. And for this purpose, what is required is that we need to apply Lagrangian approach of computational fluid dynamics, where we have to track the moisture from the precipitation point to the source up to we have considered up to 7 days, and I mean in this equation, and we try to understand from there what is the source of this moisture. So this is what we have tried to do in terms of understanding or quantifying the recycled precipitation. So when Amay applied this concept of recycled precipitation, which was originally this kind of dynamic recycling model was originally developed by Francina Dominguez, so who is now in EYUC at present. So what we did, we collaborated with them, and then we tried to understand what exactly is happening for Indian monsoon. And what we have found is something very interesting. Now I'll just mention about the middle row, which is talking about recycling ratio. So recycling ratio means the precipitation that is being generated from local evapotranspiration divided by the total precipitation. And if you see the recycling ratio, you can see during August and September, the recycling ratio is quite high over the Gangetic Basin and the Northeast region. It's around 20 to 25%. So that means it's a huge amount of precipitation. Now, during the initial part of monsoon, what is happening, the soil is kind of, soil moisture is very low because it is just after the pre-monsoon summer. As the soil is dry, so evapotranspiration is quite low. But as the monsoon progresses, the crops are getting matured, the vegetations are getting matured, the soil is becoming more moisture rich, and because of which, what is happening during August and September, the evapotranspiration is very high. When the evapotranspiration is very high, they will contribute to the moist atmospheric moisture that results into higher recycling precipitation, and the recycling ratio becomes quite high. And you can see here the recycling ratio is very high during August and September. It is around 20 to 25%. Now, what we have mentioned is about the mean rainfall. When we are talking about mean rainfall, we are talking about 20 to 25%. But we are not sure what is actually happening for extreme rainfall. This is what is very important, because when we talk about extreme rainfall, we essentially talk about the surge of moisture that is coming from ocean. So we are trying to understand also what exactly is the contribution from the land. So this is the work which was done in collaboration with Roxy Mathukol of Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune, and where we have found is that there has been a quite a significant increasing trend of widespread extremes over this region. And what I wanted to know is that what will be the contribution from different sources. So what we did, we applied the similar kind of algorithm which was developed for recycled precipitation, and we tried to understand what are the contributions. The first thing what we have found is that Arabian Sea contributes the highest. This is very important because what we have found is that the depressions are normally generated from Bay of Bengal and they entered, but because of the wind circulation of depressions, that attracts a lot of moisture from the Arabian Sea, and that makes the Arabian Sea to be the highest contributor of moisture to this kind of widespread extremes. Then the second interesting part was that the second highest contributor is not Bay of Bengal, but second highest contributor is the land region, which is very important. So land plays a major role even for the extremes, and this is what we have found over central India. If you are considering the central Indian regions, over central India, even lands are actually Indian landmass are actually contributing a lot of moisture, and this is what is very important. It's around 29% of the moisture during the widespread extremes. Of course, these models are applied to the reanalysis data set, and across reanalysis data set there was not much of deviations. It's around 20, around 5% deviation is there, but still all the reanalysis are at least agreeing that land contributes quite a significant amount of moisture to Indian monsoon rainfall. Now coming to the monsoon predictions or the operational monsoon predictions. So for the operational monsoon prediction, what we have done is that what our country has done is that we have picked up one of the model which is quite good for Indian monsoon, and then the name of the model is Climate Forecast System version 2 or CFSV2. Now the CFSV2 model was further modified using the input from the scientists all around the globe to make it very specific or very good for Indian monsoon, and this has been used for monsoon simulations. However, even after doing a lot of work in terms of improving the monsoon processes, still the models are producing very high dry bias. You can see dry bias means it kind of underestimates the monsoon rainfall. When you're talking about monsoon, there is always a competition of getting the monsoon rainfall among the ocean and the land. And what is happening is that the models always prefer the ocean. So what is happening, the oceanic regions are always having a wet bias. That means oceanic rainfalls are overestimated and the land rainfall is underestimated. And if you're considering GPCP data or any kind of reanalysis data, you'll find a similar kind of thing. Like, CFSB2 has a dry bias over the Indian landmass and wet bias over the oceanic regions, mostly the Western Indian Ocean or Arabian Sea region. Now, what we wanted to test another hypothesis that, okay, we know that CFSB2, what we have found is that the CFSB2, the land representation is not very good. And the other problem was the kind of evapotranspiration that CFSB2 generates from the land, it is quite low compared to what we see in the in all the reanalysis data sets or observed data sets. So that shows that the land representation is quite bad in CFSB2. So what we tried to understand is that, let's say if you improve the land representation, will that improve our bias condition or will that reduce the bias? That means what we tried to do is that we have considered a zone, a region, and we apply a regional land atmosphere model, which is a weather research and forecasting model coupled with CLM, community land model. And we ran the model over this region with the boundary conditions from CFSB2, which is a global model, and try to find out if we do that, are we really improving the processes or not. So this is what is sort of a weather research and forecasting model coupled with community land model. This is the atmospheric component, which is the weather research and forecasting model, and this is about a land model. In a very simple framework, I have tried to show how the different variables are, how the different components are interacting with each other. And for the vegetation, what we have considered a prescribed vegetation, which is kind of a climatological vegetation or a constant vegetation over a period. So you're not really considering a dynamic vegetation here, but this is what we have considered. Now, when we apply the WorkCLM for our regional simulations, this is the work which was done by Dr. Anjana Devanand, my former PhD student. And what she did is that she considered this region and applied WorkCLM. So these were the IMD data, and this is the ERA interim. And you can see this was the original bias. If you're considering over the Gangetic Basin region where the land feedback is quite high, and you can see over the region the dry bias is quite high. But when you start using the WorkCLM or WorkNOAA LSM, there are two land surface models which you have considered just to make sure that it is not a model artifact of a specific land surface model. And what we have found is that at least over the Gangetic Basin, the dry bias has been reduced from 68% to 25% or 13%. So what we have not shown is that here is that we have also further done some more tests. What we tried to do is that we have considered even a finer resolution, because one of the questions which was asked by the reviewer of GRL is that let's say if you are claiming that climate, the land surface is actually reducing the dry bias, but it may also possible that if you are running the model at a finer resolution, that is probably helping to reduce the bias. But what we have found is that even if you go for a finer resolution and consider the land evapotranspiration to be same as what exactly is being generated from CFS-V2, then also, and we have prescribed that and we run the model, we have to do a lot of modifications in the model, and we have found that your dry bias is not actually reducing. Your dry bias is only getting reduced when you are actually improving a better representation of land. However, we have found over these regions there is a kind of a dry bias. The dry bias has slightly been shifted here, and we could not really found what is the reason behind it. But at least what we could achieve is that over the Indian landmass, the dry bias has been reduced quite significantly. Then what we try to understand, we try to make sure that it is not just a coincidence or model artifact. At least our moisture mass balance is supporting what exactly we are getting. So if you are considering the CFS V2 results first, so CFS V2 versus the ERA interim, and we have applied again the recycled precipitation model or dynamic recycling model. And what we have found is that this is what is the observed sorry, this is the contribution from the oceanic sources, and in the ERA interim, and this is what is CFS-V2. So you can see even for the oceanic contribution also CFS-V2 underestimates, and the green one is the contribution from the total land region, and this is the contribution that is from total land region in CFS-V2. This is what is coming from the reanalysis dataset. There is an underestimation, and the same sort of underestimation is in the recycled precipitation, that is over the Gangetic Basin, because we are focusing on the Gangetic Basin, and you can see there is an underestimation. So underestimation was there from the land contributions as well as from the oceanic contributions in CFS-V2. Now when we are considering WorkCLM, what is happening is that as expected, the recycled contributions have been significantly improved, and you can see that recycled contributions have improved for both the cases. But what is also happening is that oceanic contributions has also improved. So land contributions are expected to be improved because we have a better land representation. But what is happening is that the oceanic contributions have also improved. And we are trying to understand why is it happening. Then we have found here probably the resolution is playing a role, because what was happening in CFS-V2, the Himalayan region was not properly represented, and it was allowing lot of cold air that is coming from extratropical region to enter into the Indian landmass before the monsoon, and that results into cooling of the land of Indian region. When there is a cooling of land region, the land ocean thermal contrast doesn't really develop in a proper way, and that doesn't allow the oceanic moisture to enter the land region with its full capacity. And because of which, what was happening in CFSV2, the cooling because of the extratropical wind that is entering through Himalayas was not allowing the Indian rainfall to precipitate over the landmass. But when you improve the Himalayan representation, it automatically doesn't allow the extratropical region. So Indian landmass could attain the temperature as expected, and because of which you are getting a good rainfall from the oceanic contributions as well. So this again tells you that, well, this is not just about recycled precipitation, but all these components are connected with each other, and in different ways, one component is affecting many other components in Earth system science as well as in monsoon systems. Now, the other part, what is very important, is that human intervention, which is also another very important part, because we know that if you're talking about Indian region, the human interventions has increased quite significantly. In fact, Professor Vimal Mishra has done a huge amount of work considering the human interventions, and he has done a significant contributions in terms of generating the new irrigation data, which is very important because this is something which is very important and is being neglected for a long time. Now, if you are considering the irrigation fractions, this is what is the area equipped for the irrigation. So you can see quite a significant region of Gangetic Basin and the Punjab Haryana region or Indus Basin are irrigated, and the most of them is groundwater fed irrigations. And this irrigation has been increasing for quite some time. You can see from 1970 to 2010, there has been a significant increase in the Kharif season irrigation water use. Kharif season means during the monsoon season, the irrigation water use has been increased. The other important part is that around 50% of these regions are actually paddy field. Now, one of the problem with any kind of conventional land surface model is that irrigation is not represented in those models. Of course, very recently there have been a lot of modules which has come which talks about irrigations, but those irrigations are not really taking care of paddy irrigation, which is one of the major irrigation for Indian landmass. For the paddy irrigation, what we have to do, we have to what farmers do, they actually add a layer, a soil layer, which is of very low permeability on the crop land, and then that will help you to keep the cropped area under submerged condition. So under pond like condition they create artificially, and over that region normally paddy is being cultivated. This is the way normally paddy irrigation, this is generally the practice of paddy irrigation, and this is somehow it was not being represented in any of the new irrigation modules which is being used any kind of CLM, no LSM or any kind of land surface models. So what Anjana did is that Anjana add a new module. She developed a new module. She added a new module to WorkCLM, and of course this module is now online available for anybody to download. And then she wanted to do some more 3 experiments. So one of the experiment what she did is she has not considered no irrigation. So there is there is no irrigation, which is the control simulations. We have done these simulations for 25 years. The second one is realistic irrigation. So realistic irrigations where we have considered the paddy fields. So we have considered the paddy fields, and this is what is the amount of water that is being applied. The third one is idealistic irrigation, which normally our different irrigation modules which are available for land surface models that considers that when soil moisture goes below permanent wilting point, you start irrigating them and let the soil moisture reach the field capacity and stop it. So this is some sort of an idealistic irrigation where we are not actually misusing water. Now, if you are considering the realistic irrigation minus idealistic irrigation, you will find that lot of water we actually misuse. And so what we wanted to understand is that what are the impacts of change in water management on the atmospheric processes, which is kind of very non-intuitive, but we wanted to try this experiment. So we are not really talking about feedback from irrigation, but we are trying to understand feedback from the change of management practice of irrigation to the monsoon processes. So we are going one step ahead and we are trying to understand that what exactly is happening. And this is what was applied for the irrigation for paddy. So I'm not going into details. What I'm trying to tell you is that we have considered different components of irrigation equation, and then we have considered the ponded conditions, and we did some more calibration in terms of checking it with the with the different satellite data sets and trying to understand what should be the better parameters in terms of submerged height and so on. And when we applied this, what we have found is that till August, there was not much of a difference when you are considering idealistic irrigation or the realistic irrigation. But when you are considering September, when the land atmosphere feedback is the highest, then what we have found is that if you consider the irrigation minus control, which is realistic irrigation minus control, majority of the rainfall band is actually moving towards the western side. But if you're considering ideal irrigation, it is actually over the central India. And what we have found is that this northwestern shift is associated with the change in the with the potential temperature that results into this sort of shift. So this is what we have found, and one of the major conclusion that came out from this work is that it's not just the land, but also if you change your land management practice, that also has the potential in terms of changing the monsoon rainfall or monsoon rainfall spatial pattern. Now what we have understood till now is that how land is contributing and how the changes in land factors are actually how the changes in the land management factors are actually changing the Indian monsoon rainfall. Now here what we try to understand, this is the ongoing work by Sachin Budakoti, who is my present doctoral student. So what we wanted to see is that, let's say we know that because of change in monsoon, your vegetation pattern keeps on changing. So there is the interannual variations of vegetation. And what we wanted to understand, is there any specific feedback from this interannually varying vegetation to the interannual variations of monsoon rainfall? And for this purpose, what we considered is that we have done another numerical experiment with WorkCLM, where we have considered the MODIS LAI datasets, and we have considered two cases. One is experiment with one first experiment we have considering interannually varying LAI, and the second experiment we have considered the climatological leaf area index, where we are not considering any kind of interannual variations of LAI. And what we have simulated a lot of variables, and then we tried to understand what exactly are the processes, in what way the entire network is being built to understand the land atmosphere feedback from the interannually varying vegetation. So this was the purpose what we wanted to do. The first thing so this is the region what we have considered for our WorkCLM simulations, and this was the land use land cover map, and this was the vegetation. You can see that the the plots for the LAI for 2004 to 2018 for different years, there is a huge variability. And normally in work what we considered is that we are considering the constant LAI or the climatological LAI, which is given by this bold line, and you can see there is a huge variations. And what we wanted to understand, that what are the impacts of this variation, or what are the feedbacks from these variations to the interannual variations of monsoon rainfall. So what we did, we performed the simulation. This is the first result. What we have found is that, when you are considering the work simulation with varying LAI, and the second one is climatological LAI, the varying LAI is actually producing better interannual variations of Indian monsoon rainfall, which are close to the observed data set. So it improves the correlation coefficient from 0.385 to 0.507. And this kind of increase in the correlation coefficient is actually seen in majority of the regions except one or two. Except one or two regions, in majority of the regions, what we have found is that the feedback from the varying LAI is actually impacting the interannual variations of monsoon rainfall. Then what we wanted to do, we wanted to consider all of these variables like precipitation, temperature, evapotranspiration, albedo, leaf area index, relative humidity, U wind, V wind, and soil moisture. And we wanted to develop a process network. So when we are developing a process network, we are using the concept of entropy. Entropy means the expected value of surprise. So let us try to understand what does it mean by entropy. So I'll just give you a simple example to explain entropy. Let's say if I'll mention that I have to catch a flight at Mumbai airport, and I have to start my journey from IIT Bombay. And if I'll mention that, normally during the office hours, the traffic volume is quite high, because of which it's always better to start your journey from IIT Bombay to Mumbai airport at least 2 to 2.5 hours before. And if I give this kind of information, then you will not really be surprised. So the value of this input will not be that high. But let's say if I'll mention this, but we all know that the traffic volume will be very low during morning 2 a.m. That means from midnight 12 to morning 2 a.m. So let's say if I'll mention again that, you know, today at midnight, you have to start your journey to catch a flight probably at 4 a.m. and you have to start early because there is a huge traffic volume because of something else. This is very unusual that during midnight there will be a huge traffic. But I am telling you, I am giving you an information that during midnight the traffic volume will be very high. That means it's a information which has a lot of surprise with it. And this information has huge importance to you because it is extremely important to you, because otherwise you will not get prepared properly, or you are not prepared for this kind of high traffic volume which is kind of unexpected during the midnight. So entropy means what is the probabilistic mean of these surprises. So the information which has, or the incidence or the event which has lowest probability has highest surprise. Hence we are mentioning log 1 by p is the measure of the surprise, and p is the probability. P multiplied by log 1 by p, if you sum it up, this is the expected value of surprise. And when you are considering joint entropy of two variables, it is given by this, using the similar kind of concept which was used for probability theory. And if you are considering mutual information, that is the information that is jointly shared by two variables, this tells you that both of them are co-occurring or co-varying. So maybe because there is a third factor which is affecting both of them, and because of which they are co-varying. So mutual information is providing you the information that how they are co-varying, and they are at real time. So the interactions between these two variables are happening at a real time. Now another term which is known as transfer entropy. So transfer entropy is somewhat giving you the causality information. So it tells you that, let's say we have xt and xt plus 1 and ys. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that I'm trying to give you the information of how much of xt plus 1 is being contributed of past of ys, and that is not being contributed by the past of x itself. So that tells you y is actually directly contributing to x, which is not being represented by the past of x. And this is what is the information of transfer entropy, and that tells you y is actually affecting x. So these are the different indicators, and what we try to do, we try to develop a causality network which is essentially based on the transfer entropy. So you can see these are the different regions and the different variables and so on. And this is a kind of a quite complex process network, which is a kind of a very dense process network. But what I tried to do is that we tried to show the land variables with a different color, like LAI, the evapotranspiration, the albedo, the soil moisture, and these different, I mean, all other atmospheric variables are shown with a cyan color. So the other colors are representing the land, the links that is being generated from land variables. And in the same way, this is kind of a chord diagram which shows you these are essentially the precipitation of different regions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just for your just to tell you, first one is 1 means Ganga basin, 2 is northeast India, 3 is southern India, 4th is northwest India, and 5th is central India. So we'll remember this thing: 1 for Ganga basin, 2 for northeast, 3 southern, and 5 central. So these are the 4 major regions. Now these are the precipitation of these regions: P1, P2, P3, P5, P4, P5, C6, and these are essentially the land. So what it tells you is that from S7, the soil moisture of 7th region, how much it is going to P3, how much it is going to P4, and so on and so forth. So similarly for E7, how much it is. So these are essentially the sinks, and these are essentially the sources of information. Or so this tells you that this variable impacts this one, and the thickness of the chord is actually sorry, here we have not really considered the thickness because it will be very much complicated. So this actually tells you that how much it is I mean, which land variables are contributing the precipitation of what region. So this is what we wanted to show in terms of a chord diagram. Now, what we have found is something very interesting. So first thing what we have found is that the interannual variations of land, if you are considering the leaf area index, the vegetation properties, if you are considering different L uh, variables, they are actually contribute quite significantly to the precipitation. The second important factor what we have also found is that if you are picking up a drought year and surplus year, what we are finding is that drought years have more dense network compared to the surplus years. And this is what we have found. Even the patterns, the way the land variables are actually impacting the precipitation, there is a huge variability across drought and surplus years. And what we have found is very interesting. We have found that during the drought years, the number of links that is being generated are quite high compared to the surplus years. So we have been found it's consistently the number of transfer entropy links during the drought years. These are drought years and these are surplus years. We have found that drought years the number of links are quite high. Now, and this increased number of links are coming from the land variables. What we have found, if you are considering LAI, evapotranspiration and soil moisture, these three variables, if you consider these three variables are producing more number of links during drought years, which are not happening during surplus years. This is quite consistent because normally in the dry spells, what Amay earlier found is that during the dry spells, what is happening, the soil moistures become more active and they results into more kind of a recycled precipitation. So this is kind of consistent, that tells you in a drought period the land process probably plays even higher role in terms of generating the variations of rainfall. And this is what we have found, which is quite consistent across multiple independent analysis. Now, so we have become quite confident with the in terms of in terms of process network, we thought of applying this in terms of explaining the Himalayan ecohydrology. So in Himalayan ecohydrology, this was done by my other student Tejasvi Chauhan, and which we just published in Journal of Hydrology. And what we wanted to understand is that, so let's say if we are considering different time steps. This is at time step T, and this is past time step or lag time steps. So what we are trying to understand is that there is atmosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. They are being connected to each other. There are different variables. These are essentially the real-time connections. And these are certain connections, the rate connections which are coming from past, which are representing the causality and which are representing the memory. So what we wanted to understand is that how much variation is coming from memory and how much is happening at real time for the Himalayan region. So we have considered the Himalayan regions, and these are essentially R1, R2, R3, are three regions in the southern part of Himalaya, and these are this is from west to east. Similarly, R4, R5, R6 in the middle Himalaya, and over the northern Himalaya it's R7, R8, and R9. Of course, the southern Himalaya has a lot of vegetation, so we'll focus on the results of some southern Himalaya. And when we have considered three seasons, the first season is March, April, May. The second season is June, July, August, September, that is covering the monsoon season. And third season is sort of winter. And what we have found is something very interesting, is that if you are considering the non-monsoon seasons, the memory plays a major role. If you are considering during summertime, memory plays a major role in terms of maintaining the ecohydrological network. But when you're coming to monsoon, because of the sudden rainfalls and every day the patterns are getting changed, it is more like dominated by the real-time connections compared to the memory. So during the monsoon season, this is not really dominated by the memory. So it's more dominated by the real-time connections. But again, in the winter, when the rainfall drops, it again becomes more like a memory-driven. And so what we tried to do, we tried to synchronize it. So essentially we consider three kind of cases. One is forcing and feedback. Forcing and feedback tells you about the memory based connections, and synchronization means a real time connection. So you can see here, I don't know how much it is visible because of the color, but it shows that during the monsoon season there are more synchronized kind of connections, where if you're considering the non-monsoon periods, these are more kind of a memory driven connection. So this is one of a very useful tool for specifically understanding when multiple coupled processes are involved, to understand how much is contributed by memory and how much is contributed by real time. And this also tells us, yes, look, I mean, if you're considering Earth system, all the variables are connected to each other. So I think the time has gone when we really focus on a compartmental analysis. Rather, we need to consider the entire Earth system processes. And the next step, of course, would be to how to understand the resilience of how to understand the climate resilience of this kind of eco-hydrological systems. So I'll not list down the conclusions, but I'll just mention that the Earth has four spheres: atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere, and each of the sphere has multiple components, and all of them are connected through links, which makes a complex network. And if there is a perturbation in any of the component, depending on the amount of perturbation, there will be changes across multiple variables, and these changes or perturbations will be propagated through links. And if we really need to understand the perturbation dynamics or the trajectory of the system, we have to consider the system as a whole. Thank you for your attention. And I'd like to thank all my students who teach me newer concepts every day. So they are our strength. And thank you all for your kind attention and joining this talk. Thank you.